December 2024. We have present in the meeting Councillors Allison, Anderson, Brown, Carmichael, Chalmers, Clark, Convery, Cooper, Cowan, Devlin, Fagan, Ferguson-Miller, Frame, Hamilton. We have apologies from Councillor Kerr and Councillor Handybody substituting. We have present Councillors Logan and Loudon. Councillor McCallan has submitted his apologies and Councillor Horn is substituting. We have present Councillor McClymont. We have apologies from Councillor McCreary and Councillor Hose is substituting. And we have present Councillors Leslie MacDonald, David McLaughlin, Richard Nelson, Norman Ray, Mo Razak, Kirsten Robb, John Ross, and we have apologies from Councillor Shearer and Councillor Johnson-Dempsey substituting, and apologies from Councillor Walker with Councillor Scott substituting. I'll hand back to the Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I come to the first item, which are declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any declarations of interest. Can I come to item 2, which are the minutes of the previous meeting? Are there any questions on the minutes of the previous meeting? Councillor Robb.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the point. It was just minutes look fine. It was just to see if we could get a little bit added to reflect the discussion that we held in decision under item 6, and I think I talked about it under item 10. I've discussed it with Paul as well. To add that we, after mitigating travel implications on the environment, add in with officers to consider the inclusion of provision in the planned review of the employee travel plan for mitigations to carbon neutralise those flights which are deemed necessary, which I think I raised at the end of the meeting and there was general agreement. Just to have that reflected in the minutes would be great. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you for the point and thank you for advance notice of it. I think our officials were content that that reflected the assurances that were given, and if the committee is in agreement, I think we'd be happy to make that adjustment to the minutes. Is the committee agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, okay. There are no other questions, so can I ask that we agree the minutes as amended as a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Can I come now to item 3, which is the revenue budget monitoring report, and can I come to Jackie Taylor to speak to that report?
Thank you, Chair. This is our revenue budget monitoring. This is taking us up to the 4th of October this year. Just to take you through the report at section 4, I am reporting, as I have before, around teacher numbers and the risk around financial penalty if we don't maintain our teacher numbers for the year. As I've advised before, we won't know the position until after census is published in December. We have shared our position and our mitigations with the Scottish Government in relation to our teacher numbers for this year. At section 4.6, again, as I've reported before, we are still awaiting funding for the employer's pension contribution increase for teachers, but we do expect to receive funding for this. We expect it will come through as part of our budget settlement. At section 4.7 onwards, we've taken an opportunity to look at an early outturn on some lines, and that feeds into the budget paper, which is later in the agenda. Firstly, at 4.7, around our pay award, we know that the pay award for 24-25 has now been implemented. This paper refers to funding that will carry forward and be used to fund the 25-26 pay award. At 4.8, we're referring to utilities. We've seen a recent downward trend in utility prices, and that's allowed a benefit into next year's budget, but it also will materialise as an in-year underspend this year. And around council tax, our budget for this year assumed an impact of new build properties, as well as an impact of the economic climate on our arrears collection. What we are seeing this year in our early outturn is an over-recovery of council tax this year of £3.3 million. That reflects better arrears collection than we'd budgeted for, and also an increase in property numbers over the budgeted level. Again, that will create an in-year underspend. The total underspend from those areas will be around £5.9 million. As I say, that's covered in our budget paper later in the agenda. I am suggesting that because we haven't yet had our settlement, and that will be not known until mid-December when the Scottish Government budget is finalised, in terms of notifying us of our settlement, we're suggesting that that still presents a significant risk to next year's budget, and we're suggesting that no actions taken at this point on our expected one-off underspends, and that instead they're considered alongside the settlement when that's received. At 4.11, we're referring to transfers from capital. This is us just making sure that the funding is in the right place from an accounting perspective, and that relates to the private housing scheme of assistance. There's a £1 million budget for that. The overall budget remains the same. It's just where that amount of money will sit now in our revenue budget. Our housing revenue account position is covered at section 5, and we are projecting a break-even position for the housing revenue account. As always, the appendices to the report show each of the services position. For general services at Appendix 1, and our HRA position is shown at Appendix 2. So if I take you back to section 2 and the recommendations, we're asking that the position for general fund be noted alongside that early outturn position for those areas that I talked about, and also the projected break-even position for the housing revenue account is also noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Jackie, can I ask if there are any questions on that item? Would you please indicate now? And could I come to Robert Brown?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just wanted to make an observation, if I may, on 4.3, the teacher numbers thing. I mean, not to beat about the bush, this has been something we've discussed at meetings right through the financial year. And it's absolutely idiotic, really, that we're arriving at December before there's a finalisation of this important aspect of the Council's financial position for this year. Now, I accept in large measure this will be sorted out in December, and we're kind of almost at December. But I wonder if we have any kind of reassurance, either from officials or at the COSLA level, that we won't have a repetition of this nonsense next year, and the Council will have, in good time and in advance of the budget, the ability to actually sort out what its proposals and potential can be with regard to its arrangements for the education service.
Well, I'm afraid from my point of view, I don't feel confident enough that there won't be a repetition of this nonsense next year, but I'm happy to turn to any officials who may have any kind of insights, but I think the honest truth is we do not know it at this stage. Jackie.
I'd reiterate that position at this time. I haven't had any information on whether there will or won't be any indication of penalties for next year.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions on the item? I don't see any other questions, so can I ask us to, I think we need to agree to note that report, agree to the recommendations in the report. Agreed. We're agreed. Can I come now to item 4, which is a capital budget monitoring paper, and return to Jackie to speak to that item.
Thank you. So this is now our capital budget monitoring report. This covers the same period. This is to the 4th of October. Section 4 covers the position for our general fund capital programme. Our programme is £76.792 million, and at 4.2 we report that that includes proposed adjustments that are in the appendix, which reduce our budget for a number of areas, reflecting the timing of spend around our leisure and transformation fund projects, our secondary schools projects, and also Lark Hall Leisure Centre. I'll cover those in a second. 4.3 picks up the point I mentioned a second ago around making sure that the funding for the private housing scheme of assistance is in the right place. So we're moving it from capital to revenue. I'd also pick up at section 4.7 around the Nature Restoration Fund. I had reported before that the Scottish Government had advised that that particular fund had been earmarked in 24-25 for the local government pay award, and there was uncertainty whether those monies would be received next year to make up for the loss of funding this year. We have had recent correspondence that we will receive that funding next year, and on that basis we will look to now try to maximise what spend we can in 24-25 on the basis that we'll get that money back in 25-26. In terms of our forecast for the year, we are looking to maximise spend on our capital programme as much as we can this year, and to the 4th of October we've spent £17.5 million. Our housing programme is picked up at section 5 of the report on page 19. And Appendix 4 provides the position for the programme, reporting an overall programme of £77.2 million. The forecast for the year is £72.1 million. Now, the rest of this section covers the reasons for that, and that relates to the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. Firstly, we would report that additional £1.7 million has been received from the Scottish Government for affordable housing. That is for both council and RSLs, and as a result of the element that is allocated to RSL for projects, for grant for projects, £324,000 is additional funding for the council. The affordable housing budget is £43.7 million, and we're estimating that we will spend £38.6 this year. So that's an underspend of just over £5.1 million. That is mainly as a delay, as a result of delays at projects at Cairnswell Avenue in Cambuslang and Brackenhill Farm in Hamilton. But also, in addition, the average price that we're paying for properties purchased through the market purchase scheme has reduced, reflecting the size of properties that we're buying. So that's a positive position that we're actually getting these for less than we'd budgeted. Given the outturn for the year, we are proposing that we would increase the budget for that extra £324,000 of funding. Instead, we'll look to maximise the grant that we can draw down, and we will reduce the borrowing in this year, and we'll carry forward that money into next year to complete those projects. At 5.6, we're reporting for the Housing Capital Programme that we spent £22.4 million. I'll just take you to the appendices. On page 21 in Appendix 1, the adjustments that I mentioned earlier are detailed there. I'll just take you through those. Firstly, for Community and Enterprise Resources, there is £252,000 for a project at McCurdy Park, and you can see the funding package that makes that up within that appendix. As I mentioned, to reflect the spend timescales for Larkhall Leisure Centre, £1.027 million will be carried forward into next year. For place-based investment funding, £589,000 has been received from the Scottish Government for projects detailed in that appendix. So that's Discover, Lanark Outdoor Space and also Coal Yard. Secondary schools, again to reflect the project timescales for spend, £4.7 million will be carried forward into next year. We're also adding in some adaptation and reconfiguration works required at Stonewall High School. They will cost £400,000, £50,000 of which will be spent this year, and that will be funded from developer contributions. Our Leisure and Culture Transformation Fund is detailed on page 22. £4.9 million will be carried forward to continue those projects into 25-26. For education, £332,000 has been received from the Scottish Government, and that's to support the expansion of free school meals in primary schools. And for law, primary school, nursery expansion, we have £200,000, and that's funded from developer contributions. If I take you back to the recommendations of the report, we're asking that the General Fund Capital Programme and the Housing Capital Programme be noted, that the adjustments that I've covered there at Appendix 1 be approved, and to note that we'll continue to monitor the programme through the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. Can I ask if there are any questions in this report? Could you please indicate now? Who's this? Okay. Councillor Hamilton.
My thing's acting a bit funny, but I think it obviously is working. As a local member, I would just like to welcome the money that's been invested in Law Primary School nursery expansion. I know this will be greatly appreciated by the local community. They've had a bit of a baby boom in the past few years, so there has been a sharp increase in the amount of people that are applying for the nursery. So the increase in places will be very gratefully received. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Can I ask, are there any other questions in that report? I don't see any, so can we agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Can I come now to item 5, which is an update on funding, and return to Jackie to speak to this item. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our update to funding report. This advises members of any additional funding that's been made available to the Council from Scottish Government or other external sources since the last committee. They're detailed at section 5 in summary and covered at appendix 1 and 2. All of the funds received are expected and for a specific purpose. So if I take you to appendix 1, in revenue, we have funding relating to the Ukrainian resettlement. This is year 3 of funding, £218,000. That's associated with welcome accommodation. And on Appendix 2, in relation to capital, many of these we've already reported as part of our last report. We've got the free school meal expansion programme, £332,000. We've got place-based investment programme of £589,000. We've got funds around Heat and Energy Efficiency Scotland, that's our area-based schemes, £2.976 million. And also Affordable Housing Supply Programme, that £1.72 million that I mentioned a second ago. In terms of recommendations at section 2, we're asking that these additional funding are noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions on this report? And can I come to Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to welcome this additional funding from the Scottish Government, but in particular the capital funding via the place-based investment programme regarding the Coalyard Town Centre social housing development. As we know, there's a high turnover, there's a low turnover, high demand, of housing in the area, and I know a community survey identified a need for more social housing in the area, so this is very much welcome. I'd also like to pay thanks to the Larkhall community growers who are acting on behalf of the Plan Partnership for their work on the application, but it was just to welcome this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I'm sure you would agree with them. I suppose my observation as somebody that's been around town centre policy for a long time is that actually in Larkhall we seem to have quite a vibrant town centre, which is not the case in every one of our communities. And I'm sure the project will help drive footfall into the town centre. Okay. Are there any other questions on the report? There are none. Can we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Can I come now to item 6, which is the Employee Workforce Monitoring Information Report, and Michelle Milne will speak to this item. Michelle.
Thank you. This is a regular update report which comes to committee around workforce monitoring and contains specific employment information which you'll be familiar with. In terms of section 4 in that report, you will see that the Council's average absence rate has increased to 5.1%, which is an increase of 0.4%. And you can see the breakdown in the report in terms of AP, T&C, teaching staff and manual workers in terms of where those increases are taking place. You'll also be familiar with the occupational groups and the resources just in terms of the information that goes to other committees in terms of where those increases are taking place. On page 32, you'll see at the top of that page, psychological and musculoskeletal conditions remain the two main reasons for absence, and that's fairly long-standing in the council. And detailed in that section, you can see there's been a decrease in days around musculoskeletal. Psychological conditions has increased, and there's some further information in the report I'll go over in terms of the supports we're offering around that. And there has been an increase in stomach, bowel, blood and metabolic disorders, as well as respiratory conditions, which we do see as we approach winter as well. In terms of section 5 of the report, you'll see there's been an increase in the number of employees that have been referred for a medical examination by 130 employees. And under physiotherapy treatment, 965 employees have been referred, and 73% of those have remained at work whilst they're undergoing treatment. In terms of employee support, there's been a decrease in referrals there. And in terms of referrals for counselling, there's 324 referrals that have been made there. Probably just in the bullet point above there, under employee support, just to flag as well that there's 89% of these have related to personal issues for employees. And I know in June this year we brought an employee wellbeing update to you just in terms of the supports that we're offering, and we provided information on that split in terms of personal and work-related reasons in terms of how we're supporting employees. In terms of section 6, you'll see that the number of incidents recorded for the period was 495, and other details in terms of the breakdown there in that section. And I just wanted to again flag to committee that there is a group in education that is dedicated and was set up to looking at incidents that are taking place across education resources. Personnel managers and the trade unions work together on that group, and also to say that there has been additional funding around school support assistance in terms of training. And there's a training programme in addition to our normal learn development programme that has been targeted around in-service days for the next 6 in-service days there. And in terms of the motion that was passed previously, which is the Unison chart around violence at work, that work in terms of taking that forward has been built into our health and safety resource meetings in terms of taking that forward, and we're just revisiting our action plan and activities that we've got taking place just to support that going forward. Section 7, you will see, gives you an update in terms of employee relations activity. There were 71 disciplinary hearings, which was an increase of 2, and in those cases, action was taken in 60 of the cases. There are also 6 appeals that were submitted during that, and the appeals panel information, etc., was there in terms of outcomes. You'll see under grievances in dignity at work incidents, there has been an increase in those areas over that period that we're reporting on, of 5 in each of those. Section 8 gives us an update on employee development, and the numbers there are really high, actually, in terms of the activities that we've got going on. In terms of the bullet points there, you'll see there's 3,227 attendances at classroom learning, 507 at virtual classroom, and just short of 28,000 e-learning packages have been delivered during the period that we're reporting on as well, which is really positive. In terms of Section 9, there's information there on turnover, and during that period, April to September, that's sitting at 4.8, which is a slight decrease of 0.3. And then there's information on leavers and exit interviews. You'll see that there were 359 leavers and there was 46 exit interviews. We are still working with resources due to the transition and fusion in terms of continuing to capture that data and making sure that that's in the system. And then in Section 10, you'll see information around recruitment monitoring, and all this information, there's further details in the appendices. Positively, 99% of applicants completed equal opportunities monitoring forums, which is an increase of 4%. 177 applicants declared themselves as disabled and 8 were appointed. 601 applicants from a black ethnic background and 14 were appointed. And there were 13 applicants who declared themselves as veterans, and 1 was appointed. And I know that the next annual veteran update is due just at the start of next year, but the work around that action plan we had agreed in those meetings have started and taken place in terms of delivering on that. So we're continuing to take that forward as well. Really just to refer committee back to Section 2 in terms of recommendations, in terms of noting the content of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions? Could you please indicate now? There were just 2 issues that have been raised with me, Michelle. One was just that it appeared to be a very slight increase in the absence rates, but it's an increase on last year. It is, I think, on council-wide a decline on the year before. So I'm just wondering if there's any reassurance you can provide the committee that we'll continue to monitor that. And the other, again, just looking for a bit of reassurance around it, was around the number of black and ethnic minority applicants this year versus the previous year, where there seemed to be a decline in the number going for interview and then subsequently being appointed. So again, just looking for some reassurance that both of those areas are being monitored.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions. Just in terms of absence, there is a trend across Scotland in relation to this that other councils are seeing as well in terms of increases in absence. What we are actually doing just now around absence, as well as all the other normal activity which you're familiar with in terms of we've given you updates on, is that we're actually doing an operational review around absence, where we're working with managers, trade unions, personnel team and employees are involved in that. We're getting input from them. We're looking at our policies and procedures and any related policies like ill health retirement. Also, it might touch on recruitment activity, anything that's going on in employee relations, etc., overtime activity. We're also benchmarking against other local authorities, and we're doing more in-depth case reviews in occupational areas, see if there's any learning from that, anything we can understand. Looking at training and support around that, particularly for managers and information for employees, and we're also looking at our workforce data. So we're doing a bit of an exercise on that just now, just to see if there's any learning, and obviously if there is from that, and we will always learn something when we look at these things, we'll bring that back to committee. On the other point, in terms of equalities, information around recruitment, we have actually been doing a bit of an exercise on a few fronts, actually. The census data has obviously now been published from 2022. And actually, interestingly, their categorisation has changed. We refer to information or recruitment stats in terms of BME applicants. And the census has changed that to minority ethnic groups. And there's a kind of wider capture in terms of data there. So we've looked at that and also extracted the working age population information, because obviously the census captures from babies right through to an older age than somebody might want to be working. So we've looked at that and extracted all of that. We've been revisiting our mainstream inequalities data. And I would say from all of that, and bearing in mind there's probably two key things in councils, it's how your workforce is made up as well as what you're recruiting for. As well, that kind of gives you two key indicators. So we are saying that we're pretty much on a par with other councils. In relation to that, there's a couple of areas that are slightly higher, but that's population-based, and it tends to be cities, like Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Dundee, and slightly higher in Renfrewshire. But again, we are keeping an eye on that. It's not a downward trend. I would say it's fluctuations because it does go up and down. And we did work with a number of councillors just at the start of the year, or maybe the second half of the year, around creating a kind of action plan and next steps around what we want to do with equalities. And we're going to build that into the agenda for the new group that has been set up in terms of employee equalities, diversity and inclusion. So we'll build that in to that. And also, just for information, it tends to be in the categorisation for the census now. There are kind of wider groups like white Irish, Polish, Gypsy travellers and white ethnic groups that they're now including in that data. So it's an opportunity for us just to check in terms of like for like as well. So we are looking at that and we've been very active on that and we'll take forward steps at the forum as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Michelle, I only have one question on my screen and it's from Councillor Morizak.
Thank you, Chair. Jackie, I'm interested in the response to the group leader's question about black ethnic minorities and the success rate. And you had quite a lot of information that you gave, but the concern here is that I can understand maybe the working age and the other points that you've given, but when 2% are appointed this year compared to 10% white, then there seems to be a hell of a big difference. And when you look at last year's figures, it was 4% and compared to 9% white again. And if you look at the previous data as well, there's always been big differences. So that part of what you're saying, I can understand that, you know, there's different factors going into it. But the factor I would say is that if there's a number of people applying for a job and then a very small percentage have the success over and over and over and over again, then there's a problem there. And I don't know how this is going to be addressed. And comparing it with other councils in Scotland, I think just shows that the problem isn't just South Lanarkshire, it's Scotland wide, and it's quite damning more than anything else. And I think it's ridiculous that in 2024 that we're still having these figures coming through, and that the only explanation we seem to have is that this population different shifts and there's been different categories of populations and everything else. I just don't accept that explanation. I thought there needs to be further investigation into this, and I think that if it's not done, then I'm very, very concerned about the fact that a black ethnic minority person applying for a job in any council, by the looks of it in Scotland, is going to be at a disadvantage.
Okay, Michelle, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you for those comments. In terms of the information that we are seeing, particularly around the census data and that kind of categorisation, we're seeing that in terms of the population in South Lanarkshire, that's sitting at 4.4%. the number of applicants is fluctuating, and the number of, and that happens actually across all the categories that we are managing and monitoring. In terms of the white occupational group, that can go as high as 17 and down as low as 8% actually as well. So there are variations across all the categories. What I would say, which we will pick up at the forum, is that for us to gather information rather than me saying anecdotally, and we've not necessarily reported on this, the success rate in jobs depends on the applicants, the type of jobs that they're applying for, and what we do not gather information on at present just now is who has been offered a job and accepted and who's been offered a job and declined. Actually, you're not necessarily seeing that. So some of those decisions might not always be on the part of the council. So I think in terms of us gathering more information around that, that will help inform our decisions. So in terms of what actions and steps we need to do in terms of positive action, there is an awful lot of activity going on within the council from our last meeting and that last briefing that we had did in terms of work that we're doing and the next steps that we had agreed. So I think the forum to further develop that activity which you'll be involved in is the new forum that has been set up, and we'll continue to take forward those steps, but see what other information we can gather and monitor to inform our decisions and understand that data more.
Okay, can I come back? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Firstly, the 4.4% census data. The point that was mentioned was the type of jobs that they're applying for. Does that mean that through the many people that have applied for the jobs, I know that this year is with 601 compared to 1,054 last year. But is that, does that mean that over all these years that I've been looking at this, that these minorities are applying for the wrong type of jobs? Because the percentage is still allude to one thing, and I know that. And we've done a lot of work with it, because I know that the working group was set up and we did a lot of work with this. But I'm still alarmed at the fact that there doesn't seem to be much parity there. And I'm not reassured. I think that would be great. That I know that my business manager has already said that, you know, we'd like a chat and a sit down about this matter. And I would very much like to maybe have a sit down and go through this, because I'm really alarmed about the fact that the number of years I've been here, I've not seen anything positive yet on these figures. And seeing the 2% compared to 10% again, and previously it's 4% to 9% success rate, that's just not acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Can I, to bring this to a conclusion, can I suggest, and I think the suggestion is there, that the new forum is going to have to do a deep dive into these figures, and they're going to have to look at what are the most telling and sort of robust comparisons that we can make. I think there's a point there about, is there a wider issue here in local government, and can I also maybe suggest we want to look for examples of best practice and other examples of best practice that we can bring to South Lanarkshire. I don't have any other questions on this paper, so can I bring us back to the recommendations in the report? Can I ask us to agree the recommendations? Agreed. We're agreed. Thank you very much for those contributions. Can I come to item 7, which is the Community Plan Q4 Progress Report, and Jen Kerr is going to speak to this item. Jen.
Hi, thank you. I'm pleased to present the 2023-24 annual report of the Community Planning Partnership and its accompanying annual outcomes improvement report. Excuse me. Section 4.2 of the report outlines that this is part of a development of our new performance framework, which is more outcomes-based framework of the community plan itself. Following a development session with the board back in May, the Community Planning Partnership Board agreed that we wanted to have a new outcomes-focused performance framework that focused on medium, short and long-term impacts, and the longer and medium-term impacts focusing on economic and health inequality and inequity, and addressing that as a result of the work that we do in the partnership. Therefore, this report has changed slightly in format from last year. You'll notice a focus on improvement and on change. So there are now baselines in the reports, some targets to achieve, and some changes in the way things are worded. So we want to see increases or decreases or things staying the same. So it's a real focus on what difference are we making now in this report. And the action report outcomes focus, we've had to change a few of the things that we're reporting on with various partners and various parts of the council to help change that focus from these are just the amount of things that we're doing, but actually this is making a difference or it's not making a difference. This has been quite a different way of reporting for many of our colleagues, both inside the council and with some of our other partners. And we actually started working quite early on in the year to make these amendments to the activity report for this financial year. So it represents a lot of learning in our partnership, a lot of adapting processes, and in some cases even some of the indicators in order to better able to report the difference that this partnership is making. We will continue to make this change and embed the rest of the performance framework, which will be completed at the end of March 2025. The highlights of the report are that most activities are progressing as planned. There are a few red areas of the report, and they remain similar to last year's around homelessness. We are very aware that there's a national upward trend affecting all local authorities in the same way, and a national crisis in homelessness. The report, though, however, outlines a tremendous effort and successes of the Housing Service to address this landslide issue. Amber areas of the report remain down to sort of projects starting a wee bit later than planned and not having had time to be evaluated within the timeframe of the report. And there are some neighbourhood planning activity that are a little bit behind timescales due mainly to changes in the team and a refocusing of our momentum around stakeholder groups. So in conclusion, the report is a testament to the commitment of partners, their officers, communities, and the residents we work with to achieve change and improve people's lives and inequality through the community planning partnership. I would ask the board, therefore, to note the contents of the reports and the outcomes and the achievements of all partners and the communities we work with within the community planning partnership. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I ask if there are any questions in this report? I don't see any questions. Could I just very briefly say, as the chair of the Community Planning Partnership, could I highlight, which is contained in the paper, the really positive work that we do with young people on particularly the issue of climate, where we held the most recent of the conferences in Holy Cross just the other day. You will all be reassured to know that our young people are very well-informed advocates when it comes to climate action, and can also just underline the point that that has been made in that presentation about the importance of the housing emergency to those areas where we're not seeing the performance that we want to see that are reflected in the report. Okay. There are no questions, so can I bring us back to the recommendations? Can we agree the recommendations in the report? We're agreed. Can I come now to item 8, which is, first of our items for decision is a paper on the 25-26 revenue budget gap and savings, and Jackie Taylor is going to speak to this item. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. This paper reflects the information that was shared with members at the briefing session at the end of October. Just before I run through the highlights of the report, just a point to remember that we don't yet have our grant settlement for 25-26. We won't have that until mid-December, and therefore all the component parts for considering the budget aren't yet known. This paper provides an update on our budget gap. It gives points for members to consider as we go through the budget process. So just at section 3 as a reminder, we reported to committee in June on our budget strategy, and that highlighted a budget gap for the 3 years of our strategy, taking us to 27-28, of £77.3 million. The budget gap relating to 25-26, so the next financial year, was £22.3 million. What this paper now looks to do is 3 main things, and they're covered at the bullets at 3.3. I'm going to cover an update on the key budget areas. I'm going to touch on the savings and transformational change programme, and also the review of loans fund and service concessions. The paper does continue to look at that budget gap over a 3-year period, and will highlight the particular position for 25-26 within the paper. We also provide a summary and next steps and timeline for consideration as well. So just to pick up on the first of those areas that I promised to update on, at section 4 we've got an update on some key budget areas. These are predominantly the areas that I talked about in the revenue paper earlier, picking up the position around our pay award and also that position around utilities and council tax, where we're seeing a better position this financial year, and also that will then allow a better position into the next financial year. Table 1 summarises that position. You can see for utilities and council tax. For the current financial year, we expect an underspend of £5.3 million. And on a permanent basis from 25-26, we see a benefit of £5.9 million, which can help reduce our budget gap into next year. And at 4.9, we pick up that point, that would then take our budget gap for next financial year from that £22.3 million I mentioned a second ago, down to £16.4 million. In terms of that underspend, as I mentioned earlier, because we don't have certainty yet on our financial settlement, and we won't have that until December, we are proposing that no action at the moment is taken regarding that underspend. And instead, we consider that alongside the settlement when that's received. The second part of this report that I mentioned was around our Savings and Transformational Change programme, and that's picked up at section 5 of the report. As we reported to members in June, in order to contribute towards bridging the budget gap, a transformational change programme is underway. That includes a series of cross-cutting reviews as well as specific reviews across individual resources. And what that's allowed us to help form a package of savings that is in this paper at Appendix 1. Those savings total £10.6 million, and Table 2 summarises them over resources. And that 10.6, just as a reminder, is comparable to the budget gap that we're facing of £16.4 million. Just to note at the bottom of page 50, we're referring to teachers. Now, education, along with all the other resources, have been reviewing their services. We do know that a funding allocation sits within education, and that's for additionality teachers. There's 115 full-time equivalent teachers that are funded from that money that are beyond core teaching allocations. So that means that the funding has provided a level of teachers beyond that core staffing model and beyond our statutory obligations. And it would still be possible to operate without these staff by returning to those core staffing levels within schools. And Table 3 shows the financial value of that additionality teachers. And you can see that's £7.4 million. I would like to highlight, though, at section 5.7 that no proposal has been included within the savings pack in Appendix 1 in relation to reducing teacher numbers, on the basis that there still remains that uncertainty regarding the impact on our grant if teacher numbers were to be reduced. If that position does change, such that it became appropriate to consider savings against teacher numbers, then that could help address our budget gap into future years. And obviously, by not cutting teacher numbers, higher level of cuts are required to be agreed through the savings pack. Section 6 picks up the third of the three areas that this report really highlights, and that's around a review of loans fund. As we reported back in June, one of those cross-cutting reviews that I mentioned was in relation to our loan charges budget and the repayment of debt. Appendix 4 of this report gives a detailed report on that review, but a summary is provided within the report. And from section 6.3, we cover that. At 6.3, we do remind committee that there was a previous review of the loans fund back in 2019, and that looked at how the repayment profile of our borrowing took place. And by extending the period over which we repay our debt, it was identified that £68 million of loans fund advances had been repaid earlier than it would have been under the revised approach. And those one-off monies were approved for using to help our budget strategy going forward. There was also an option when we considered that loans fund review in 2019 to pay our future debt over an extended period. Now, that would have released further savings, but the downside was there'd be additional interest costs. Therefore, to mitigate those additional interest costs, the alternative approach was agreed that we would make additional voluntary repayments of debt, and that was the position that was agreed by committee. However, given the budget pressures that we continue to face, it's right to consider whether those additional voluntary repayments continue. By no longer making those voluntary repayments, then our loan charges incurred would be lower in the period of this budget strategy that takes us to 27-28. And that means that we would underspend on our loan charges budget. That would start at £18.8 million in 25-26, and that would decrease in future years. Now, because of that variable level, we can't take the higher level of savings on a permanent basis, but it is proposed that we consider a 3-year view of the saving, and we could take £14.6 million and spread that over the 3 years of this strategy. And that's shown in the first 3 columns of Table 4 at the bottom of page 152. Now, what we do understand is that will cause additional interest costs from not paying that debt as quickly as we currently do. That would be, at today's prices, £97 million, and in cash terms, £185 million, but that is over 36 years. And the impact of that interest is included within the figures we've presented here. In addition, in section 6.9, we pick up an accounting standard change, and this relates to leases, but it does impact on how we account for our service concessions, and this is how we account for our PPP transactions. That means there is a reduction in what's charged to the revenue budget, and that allows further savings to be made. And that's summarised at Table 5 for you as well. And from those two things, Table 6 summarises the overall benefit that we could see in our budget, and that shows that over the 3 years of our strategy, we could contribute £16.2 million towards our budget gap. So the savings from this are substantial. There are downsides in terms of the additional interest costs that we would incur. However, a recurring saving can still be delivered for the council without needing to cut other council services. So if it's accepted, then that could help address the budget gap by £6.6 million in 25-26, and that total of 16.2 by 27-28. If it's not accepted, we will require to have higher level of cuts through the savings process. Section 6.15 on page 154, given the proposals that we've put forward, we are pointing out that there will be in-year underspends that could also be used to support the budget strategy in future years. They are shown within the appendix. That also shows that we will have an underspend in loans fund this year as well. So the total underspends that could be available from this year to 27-28 could be £26.5 million. That would then give us the option to use those one-off underspends to help address the budget gap in future years, bearing in mind because it is one-off monies, we do have to reinstate the requirement to make a saving into future years. Table 8 shows a proposal on how we could use those levels of underspends to help smooth the budget gap over future years. And you can see at Table 8, for 27-28, it would reduce a revised budget gap from £30.4 million of cuts that would have to be made down to £13.8 million after we apply those underspends from our loans fund review. Section 7 of the report on page 155 picks up that 3-year position that I mentioned that we would come back to. And Table 9 provides a summary of how all of the elements of what I've covered in this paper can help contribute towards the budget gap over the 3 years of this budget strategy. The end column of Table 9 show that we could reduce our budget gap from the £77.3 million that we reported in June. If we reduce that for the council tax and utilities benefits that I've talked about, if all of the savings that are presented were acceptable, and if we applied our loans fund and service concession savings as I've described, we could reduce our budget gap to £31.5 million. Obviously, that will depend on decisions that are made by members. Still represents a significant budget gap over the period and still decisions to be taken around that, but it is something that we should consider as we go through the budget process. Section 8 of the report simply picks up that information but focuses on 25-26, which will be the year that we're making decisions on in February. And at 8.7, I'm picking up the point around council tax, as we know that the ability to increase council tax is a lever in managing our budget gap. In arriving at the budget gap that I've mentioned in this paper, no account has been taken of any potential increase in council tax. And Table 11 shows how each illustrative percentage increase in council tax could contribute to balancing the budget and decreasing the budget gap. So you can see 1% of an increase in council tax could release £1.58 million to decrease our budget gap. A 10% council tax could give £15.8 million. From 8.10 onwards, we're now moving into less of the numbers in terms of our budget process, but the timeline and other implications. So timeline at section 8.10 picks up our budget consultation, which will start today after this meeting, and I'll pick that up in a second. I've mentioned that our settlement is due on the 12th of December, and that will then allow us to then consider how our assumptions around our grant reflect reality. We will provide an update for members in January post-settlement, and then we would be expecting to set our budget in February. I mentioned budget consultation, and that's picked up at section 8.11 on page 158. We will start our consultation today, and we will ask for the public's view on our savings that are proposed in this pack. We propose to run that for 2 months, and once the consultation process is complete, feedback will be provided for members to consider before the budget decisions are made. Section 9 of the report simply picks up how we have applied temporary funding to balance our budget and the reinstatement of that that's required in future years. All of the figures included within this section are included within the budget gap and the other figures that I've reported today. At section 10, we pick up the employee implications of the savings that are proposed in Appendix 1. 115 full-time equivalent posts are included in those savings proposals, and that would affect approximately 191 employees. As we've adopted in the past, any employees that would be affected by any agreed savings, we would look to help them in terms of reviewing vacant posts, looking at any voluntary redeployment that employees would want, and where appropriate, look at the council switch to policy for supported any displaced employees. Just to finish up, I'm going to pick up on sections 12 and 14. That's around climate change and our impact assessments. We have completed integrated impact assessments for all of the savings proposals and as the budget as a whole, and that includes sustainability impact assessments as well. All members have been sent a link to those documents, which are now online on our internet. So if I take you back to the recommendations in this report, there are many recommendations in this report. What I would point out is that some of them do say to be considered. These don't require a decision at this stage. Members will may wish to consider these options when all of the information on the budget, specifically the grant settlement, is known. So in terms of the recommendations, we're asking that the key budget updates noted that the £3.6 million funds for pay award will be carried forward to 25-26, looking for that to be approved. The reductions in utilities and council tax and the impact they have on the budget gap, we're looking for that to be approved. The savings should be considered, the additional positionary teachers be noted, the loans fund review proposal be considered, the resultant savings from the review be considered, and the service concessions review savings also be noted. The use of the loans fund review underspends is also to be considered, and that the revised 3-year budget gap across the period, as I covered earlier, is to be noted, as is the risks detailed in the other implications section. Appreciate there's a lot in that report, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. It's a very comprehensive report, and I think it lays out very well the options that councillors have to consider. Fortunately, we don't have to make any decisions on this today, other than on those 2 areas that you're drawing our attention to in relation to pay award and utilities and council tax. Can I just emphasise, as we say, no decisions are to be made on the savings package today. Consultation will begin at the conclusion of this meeting, should the paper be agreed. All political groups have still to decide their positions and to consider their positions in the content of the paper. Our intention is to reconvene the cross-party budget working group to help the political groups decide their positions. There are a number of variables, and I think the report draws our attention to areas of risk. The budget strategy document was put together before the latest UK government budget, and we still do not know how that will filter through into the Scottish budget in December. So there is a rhythm and a usual process and a timescale that I think we're now accustomed to in the council that sits around this process. It will take place over the coming months and hopefully lead us to a position where we can set a balanced budget in February. Are there any questions on the report? I have one from John Ross.
Yes, thanks very much, Joe. I'd like to start by thanking Jackie very much for laying out the report so well and so clearly. My point was one which I raised at leaders' meeting on Monday, which was the difference in terminology from what we normally see as either approve or noted to one where we look at something that can be continued for further discussion. Am I right in thinking then that no decision would be taken in any of those things, and when another paper comes forward, that those items that you're talking about would revert to a terminology of approval, because that's what we'd be looking for at that time. But we wouldn't be talking about taking decisions on any of these matters unless it came forward as something that was asked for approval on.
I think just as Jackie and myself have set out, the only areas for decision today relate to recommendations 2 and 3. But I don't know if Jackie's nodding in agreement with that. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Alec Allison.
Reading the report, Jackie, I think anyone seeing the effect of the change how we apply the loans would be delighted that we weren't having to look at as many cuts to services today. I think, as the report says, it does just push that down the road, because it does increase costs at a later date and will probably result in, I would hope, if the economy was bouncing, less money being available, but if it's not, cuts having to be made in the future. What I'd like to ask specifically about what happens here if you extend the loans means that the level of debt is being paid off slower, therefore increasing the amount of debt we have in the future. Does that then have any effect on the borrowing we can make then to invest at that time? Is there guidelines as to the level of debt we should be carrying? Is there any guidelines regarding the level of interest we're paying, other than what we decide ourselves?
Jackie?
Thank you. In short, there's nothing that dictates to councils the level of borrowing that we can take or interest rates that we would get if we were initiating any borrowing. It's for council to decide what is affordable in terms of borrowing, and I suppose it's my job to make sure that councillors are aware of any impact of decisions that are taken around borrowing. Absolutely correct, if we extend the period over which we write off our debt, then the current level of debt that we have, it will still go down because we are still paying off debt, but it will take longer to pay off, and therefore the level of debt we have will be higher for longer. But there is nothing that prevents us from doing this. What this allows us to do is take decisions that allow us to consider the costs that are involved in this over a longer period of time and plan for that. So we are acknowledging there will be additional interest costs, and it will be for budgets in the future to make sure that we're accommodating those costs, and we've done that within the figures that I've presented today. So it allows us to save £16 million off of our budget gap now, and we would then have to continue to plan for the costs of the existing and future, any future borrowing that we may choose to take. Hope that helps.
Could I maybe just make a point that in relation to those two items, loans fund review and service concessions, I think it's maybe important to bring to the committee's attention that one of those measures, which we have used before, but in relation to service concessions, does relate to an accounting standard. So in that instance, that is something that we are being advised to do to be compliant with the accounting standard. The other section relates to the loans fund review. And I would also just make the point that in Scotland, we do have a robust system through the Accounts Commission and Audit Scotland. We do have a very robust system of audit. Okay. Are there any other questions? Councillor Cooper.
I just ask for business managers and leaders to look out for an email coming into your inbox asking you to nominate 2 people to be part of the cross-party working group, and there'll be a couple of proposed dates planned. So if you can comment on that as quickly as possible, we can get that up and running and off the ground. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions, so can I bring us back to the recommendations in the report? Can I ask us to agree the report? Agreed. We are agreed. Can I come now to item 9, which is a paper on the Glasgow City Region City deal related to the Stuartfield Way Capacity Enhancement Project. David Booth will speak to this report. David.
Thank you very much, Chair. This paper sets out the outline business case for the Stuartfield Way Capacity Enhancement Project and sets out the next steps towards project delivery. Business cases are required to develop for each City Deal project, with the strategic business case for Stuartfield Way being approved by this committee in March 2021. To date, the project has focused on the transportation challenges in East Kilbride. However, the Executive Committee of May this year approved a combined approach to the transportation challenges, whilst also supporting direct town centre intervention. This allowed for the realignment of the approved project budget of £62.2 million, with £32.2 million now allocated towards the town centre and £30 million remaining for the Stuartfield Way project. The Stuartfield Way project has progressed to the stage of an outline business case, which is set out in Appendix 1. In summary, the project will deliver 1.8 kilometres of enhanced road network, including the widening of the carriageways to enhance new junction layouts, 1 kilometre of new shared cycle routes, 5 improved junctions, including Maver and Nerston roundabouts to traffic signal control junctions, and 1 new junction to be provided into the Kingsgate Retail Park. The gross value added, or GVA, of delivering the project is estimated at £191 million over a 25-year period. Due to the timing of meetings, the outline business case was approved at the City Region Cabinet on the 5th of November, subject to Executive Committee approval today. Section 5 of the report sets out the timeline for delivery, with construction anticipated between October 2026 and October 2028. In respect of the financial implications, the project cost is £30 million, with £25.8 million expected from City Deal and the balance of £4.2 million being met by the Council. Approval to incur additional expenditure of up to £3.5 million is included in the outline business case to allow the project to be fully developed. It's important to highlight that sustainability measures have been fully explored as part of the project, including the choice of materials and use of low and zero carbon generating technologies, sustainable water resource management, sustainable waste management, consideration of life cycle costs and the impacts of the development. As the project develops and progresses to delivery stage, an integrated impact assessment will be undertaken in line with Council policy. The committee is therefore asked to approve the following recommendations in Section 2. Recommendation 1, that the outline business case is approved. Recommendation 2, that the proposed next steps be approved. Recommendation 3, that the grant funding be sought in accordance with the City Deal grant distribution process outlined in the assurance framework in relation to preliminary costs. And finally, in recommendation 4, that the relevant full business case for the project and associated sub-projects be developed for future presentation to Executive Committee and the City Region Cabinet. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions in this report? And could I come to Kirsten Robb?
I want to ask about this, and I think it's my duty to do so in the circumstances. It's to be welcomed. This project has been rescoped to improve the junctions, pedestrian and cycling facilities for sure, which will bring benefits. But I'm concerned about the remaining dualling and the impact of increased traffic on the climate impacts we're seeing locally and globally. With transport being the biggest contributor to climate-busting emissions in South Lanarkshire and public money being precious, councillors must be very careful and have the facts to hand before we make decisions to release further funding. Otherwise, these could be in direct conflict with our legal duties and our own climate action plan to contribute to national and area-based emission reductions. Modelling and traffic projections have already been done to make the case for the projects, therefore we can estimate the carbon impact now. This information is vital to assess before allowing funding to be released for an aspect of the project which may not align with our climate duties. As councillors, we would be wise to ask for that information to avoid any Rosebank type challenge where not including the climate impacts of a significant new development could be determined unlawful. That's why I'm asking for this climate impact to be provided or the decision to be postponed until elected members get the information on life cycle climate impact front-loaded as recommended by the IIA process. So to conclude, it's just about getting the information so we can make decisions adequately that align with our other duties. Thank you.
Okay. David, do you want to respond to that question? There is a request in there as well, but if you could deal with the question first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Rob. As I've mentioned, the construction techniques are improving, which will reduce carbon emissions. And in addition to that, this project will likely improve journey times and incorporate active travel and bus facilities, which will remove congestion and most likely result in reduced vehicle emissions. Having said all that, a commitment has been undertaken to undertake an integrated impact assessment for the project. However, at this stage, at this time, the detailed project proposals have yet to be developed, which is why we're seeking the £3.5 million to develop the project. Only when the details of the project have been developed can the full impacts be considered, including active travel, carbon and reductions in congestion. And it's bear in mind what we're asking is to prove the outline business case at this stage rather than the full business case, so that this will all be developed. In addition to that, as part of the planning process, environmental impact assessments will likely be required, which will include analysis of air quality, of noise and of biodiversity. So the information that you're asking for will be developed, but we require approval at this stage to move on to that stage to develop all the detailed information that we required in order to support a full business case. Thank you.
Do you want to come back here?
Thank you.
Yeah.
For sure, previous environmental impact assessment haven't included carbon, so that's something that we have to do now, considering we declared a climate emergency some years ago in the Council, and it's in our own climate strategy to reduce emissions. So I don't believe if we have the traffic projections now, we should be able to assess the carbon emissions now, and I think we need that information before we do any release. 3.5 million, it's a significant amount of money. If we don't need to do that for the dualling aspect, but carry on with the other aspects of the project, then I think we need that information just now to make sure we're fully informed and that decisions are lawful and in line with our other duties.
Okay. I do have another question on the paper, so can I come back to the request, which is really to hold the decision until we have the information that I'm using my own words here, but to hold in the decision until we have the information that Councillor Rob has requested. So I will come back to that. But could I take Councillor Anderson on a question on the paper?
Thanks, Chair. It's 10 years since this has been in the making, and they're still calling it the Stuart Fieldway project, although more money is now going to be spent in the town centre than the actual project. I'm just wondering, we've got another case here. It's been altered that many times. I think it's been altered more times than the HS2 programme down in England. And is this the final version of it? And how much money has been spent on doing these outline business cases for each of these changes? The other thing I noticed, we're going to build a new traffic signal control junction into the Kingsgate retail park. That's going to encourage more people to go to the retail park that would be going to the town centre. The town centre, who actually the people who own the retail park own the town centre and walked away from it. Part of the demise of the town centre was because of the construction of the retail park. So this doesn't really fit in with the fact that we're trying to have a vibrant town centre. So why are we spending public money constructing a road, which if they want it, they should be paying for it themselves? Thanks, Chair.
David, do you want to respond to, or Alison? Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. To pick up the point around the town centre and the relationship with Kingsgate, we have actually approached the current owners of Kingsgate for them to actually pay for the junction into Kingsgate, because as you rightly say, it increases footfall and traffic for them. If they choose not to do so, we can develop the project without that junction. So that the ideal is to address the congestion at Kingsgate and Maver roundabouts. But in so do, we do acknowledge the opportunities that then lie for the Kingsgate retailer. And as I say, we have asked for him to make a contribution towards that.
Okay. Colin, I think Colin Park wants to come in. Colin?
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, yeah.
You can. Listen, sorry, I missed some of Councillor Anderson's points, but just wanted to add on to what Alison and David has said there. I think we need to just kind of understand that this project is just another element of kind of transport improvements that we've brought in, or planning to bring into the area. We've got the works down at the southeast corner where we've improved access to development sites. We've got the works that are ongoing up at Hamilton, up at Hairmyres Interchange. We've got the active travel network we're already building as well. So the northeast corner of East Kilbride has always been a constraint. It's always come up over the years in terms of congestion, queuing and delays. And this project, moving to an outline business case, will give us that opportunity to develop it further, to design out some of the issues, to explore some of the kind of techniques that kind of David talked about, to firm up the design, finalise the kind of the modelling as well, and get some of those answers that kind of Councillor Rob was looking for as well. So it shouldn't be seen as a roads building project. It gets public transport to and from where it's wanting to go. It allows freight to get to and from location for people to get to their business as well. So it's much more than a road building project. And approval today of the outline business case will allow us to take the project on to a new level. Thanks, Chair.
Can I maybe just make a point? This has been a long-running project. It has been rescoped from where it was 10 years ago. It has not been taken forward in the form that we envisaged 10 years ago, not least through political opinion and the political opinions, I dare say, of Councillor Anderson's party during their time in power as well, and also just the financial reality that costs have escalated over that period. We went through an inflationary environment. We've now got to look at what our money buys us, and what our money buys us will not be what was envisaged 10 years ago, which, as I say, was contentious. I don't think we necessarily have commanded a majority of support across the council. And the project itself has been substantially rescoped. And I can't underline that. We are taking money from this part of the City Deal project and shifting it into the town centre because we recognise there are huge issues with congestion that are affecting the competitiveness of the town, and also because we see an opportunity to rebalance the town and redevelop the town centre. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have a substantial need to invest in this part of our infrastructure. And also there are other developments likely to take place in this part of the town, like the potential redevelopment of PlaySport. So I don't think this is perfect, but I think this is the best position we can get to within the limited resources that are available, particularly and frankly within the political constraints that are placed on us as well. I should make the point that this has already been approved by the City Region's City Cabinet, and it is now coming to the Executive Committee for approval here today. And also, just as a local member, I'm particularly keen to see us deal with Stewartfield Way in some form, because I think we're seeing too much traffic run into West Mains Roads, where we have 2 primary schools on that road. So I think it's important from that point of view as well. And also, there has been a substantial amount of residential development in the area as well, and I think they would benefit from us addressing those infrastructure issues. I want to come back to Councillor Robb's point. So there was a request there, which I suppose I I'm inclined to move, and I will move the recommendations as they are. I believe I would have a seconder in doing that. But Councillor Robb has made a suggestion here that we sort of defer or hold the paper until we receive the information that she outlined earlier. I'm just going to ask, is there a seconder for that position in the committee? I don't see a seconder for that position in the committee, so I think your position will be noted in the minutes, Councillor Robb, and that means that the recommendations can assume that they are therefore agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can I move now to item 10, which is a paper on the Transformation Fund for phase 1 update and phase 2 proposals. And I'm going to come to Stephen Gibson to speak to this paper. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the projects identified in phase 1 of the Transformation Fund programme and to seek approval for the second phase of investments, again using the Transformation Fund. The background is in Section 3. In February 2023, Council approved funding of £13 million for capital investments, and these were to help modernise leisure and cultural assets, to optimise the use of assets and to assist in the transition towards net zero. And this is what became known as a Transformation Fund. At a later meeting in May 2024, the Executive Committee approved phase 1 of the investment priorities, noting an estimated budget allocation of £8.4 million. The update on phase 1 is in section 4. Property Services have worked alongside Community and Enterprise and Finance and SLLC to develop a detailed specification for each of the projects. And now that detailed specifications and tender exercises are progressed, we have a clearer understanding of the likely costs, which are now estimated to be £8.945 million, which includes a 5% contingency allowance. A number of agreed projects are at a design and procurement stage, so we're awaiting a full market testing exercise of estimated costs before the final position will be known. However, at this stage, the current projected spend for 2024-25 is £3.5 million. And you can find a full update in phase 1 detailed in Appendix 1. Phase 2 is covered in phase 5, and committee will recall that, taking into account the objectives of the Transformation Fund, projects are assessed on the basis that they must relate to properties managed by SLLC. They must fall into one of the criteria set out in section 5.1. So to secure transformation funding, the project must be linked to the adaptation and modernisation of the property, energy efficiency and decarbonisations, reductions in liabilities and demolition, or community accessibility. Considerable time I think I've mixed up pages. I keep doing this. Apologies, my notes have appeared to have run away with me here. So, I'll take you back to section 5.3. Apologies for that. As mentioned, section 5.3, this is mainly to address the costs associated with the upgrade of floating floors across swimming pools. However, at this stage, the scale of the issues and the costs remain unknown. And it's proposed that a proposal will come back to members once the costs are known, and this will include 3G pitches to follow. The oversight arrangements are included in section 6. Section 6.1 advises that a cross-service working group has been established. It confirms that the group will monitor progress and manage the Transformation Fund budget. In the event that we deliver a list of projects delivered under the budget for phases 1 and 2, Section 6.2 confirms that there is potential for additional projects to be funded. If so, Section 6.2 advises that the current preferred additional projects agreed with the group would be to upgrade the current 3G pitch provision within this SLLC estate. And it's currently known that we have 3 pitches that are in poor condition, and it's an estimated replacement cost of £400,000 for each of these pitches. So if the funding does become available, then the new priority assessment will be carried out for these pitches. Section 7 covers employee implications, and there are no employee implications included within this report. The financial implications are set out in Section 8, and the report provides detailed updates throughout the report in Appendices 1 and 2, but Section 8.1 goes on to say that by investing this capital, we'll improve the life expectancy and performance of the properties, as well as creating opportunities for revenue savings and income generation. In terms of Section 10, and impact assessment, this report doesn't include a new policy, new function, new strategy. Therefore, no impact assessment is required at this time. So, apologies for the break in that, but if I could take you back to the recommendations in Section 2. And these comes with 5 recommendations. The first is to note progress in relation to Phase 1 of the investments from the Transformation Fund as set out in Appendix 1. The second is to approve Phase 2 as set out in Section 5 and Appendix 2. The third is to approve arrangements for monitoring the programme and budgets as set out in Section 6. The fourth is to seek delegated authority for the Executive Director of Housing and Technical Resource, the Executive Director of Community and Enterprise, and the Executive Director of Finance to increase the budget allocations for each project and/or change the scope as required when the costs become known, ensuring that the overall budget is not exceeded. And the final recommendation is that in the event that there will be any funding available following the delivery of the projects in Phases 1 and 2, is to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Housing and Technical Resource, the Executive Director of Community Enterprise and Resources to progress with further projects as identified in Section 6.2. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, can I ask if there are any questions on this report? And could I come to Robert Brown?
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted really to ask about, I suppose it's really 9.1, which talks about the improvements taking account of the wider Council objectives of energy reduction and carbon footprint. Now, I appreciate that not all these projects are in that category, if you like, but I'd like to really have just an assurance, I suppose, that in all the things we take forward here, which involve significant changes to the structures of buildings and things of that kind, that we do take every opportunity to make sure that energy costs are able to be reduced, and that renewable energy technologies are, opportunities are looked at as well. I'd like to make the comment as well that I welcome these proposals, generally speaking. I think they actually are exactly what we're looking for when we set up the Transformation Fund in the first place. But I would like that reassurance on the energy front, if I may.
Okay. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brown. That's actually set out in Section 5.1 when you look at the criteria. Criteria in 1 and 2 are, of course, aimed at extending the useful life of projects. And that's about maximising opportunity to increase use, generating income, and, of course, reducing expenditure. But criteria 3 is about reducing liabilities and demolition. All of this is aimed towards energy efficiency. We want to reduce energy efficiency, improve net zero, and reduce running costs for the council.
Yep.
Thank you. Whether this will be able to be measured in any shape or form in terms of looking at the reports as they go forward, will we be able to get sort of figures about 10% on this or whatever, this kind of thing? Will we be able to have a sort of an assessment of the extent to which revenue costs have been saved or energy improvements made?
Yeah, listen, we're happy to look at that and build that into updates. It won't be immediately, but it'll be after a period of time post-completion.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions now. Could I come to Councillor Allison?
Thanks, Chair. Very much was happy to support the introduction of the Transition Fund, because I believe that it could help the rural area quite significantly going forward. Within my own ward, I think it's 10 halls that the council has moved away from managing in the last few years. And my hope was that then some of this funding would be able to go into the rest of the halls to make them more lettable, if you like, to make them more fit for purpose. I'm therefore actually disappointed as a local councillor to see that there's nothing going into local halls. Yes, some of the major ones, and I do recognise funding going into Bigger Park. But the halls that are left, the few that are left in the rural area, particularly in Ward 3, there's nothing coming forward to them, and that is a disappointment. And that is on the back of a lack of service at the moment. We're finding that bookings aren't being taken for some halls because they cannot open them. Why can't they open them? They can't get the staff yet. I believe, was it 2 years ago, we made funding available for them to put on, is it key locks you call them, so that people can let themselves in to reduce the staffing requirement. So much as I'm pleased for this fund to be there, I'm extremely disappointed in the way that it is supporting the local halls that are left. I'd also like to highlight that in recommendation 2.4, whereas quite happy for the officers to amend budgets as long as they are remaining within the overall budget. I do not think they should be amending projects without, at the very least, local councillor approval, if not council approval. So the budget's fine, but they should not be changing the scope without approval.
Can I, and I'm happy for any officials to come in, but I think I really do have to correct you on that point. If I draw your attention to page 215, Appendix 2, the first of those items is about £500,000 of investment in improvements to accessibility of our halls and pitches. That's extended to improve our halls and pitches, and that includes remote access systems for various halls and pitches, and it's intended to address the very point that Councillor Allison has raised, and that's in addition to the investment that's been set aside for Bigger. Okay.
Sorry, that's the point I was making, Joe. That's covering the whole of the South Lanarkshire, £500,000, and it's not just access that's the problems. It's the lack of proper kitchens. Some halls aren't watertight, and there are a number of other things that have not been properly addressed within Ward 3. It's not taking away from what is there, but the balance is not right.
Okay, listen, thanks, Councillor Allison. if I pick up just the point that the council leader's making about that first item on Appendix 2, in terms of remote access systems for various halls, there is also the item that's down there, which is the last item on Phase 1, which talks, again, improved access door entry security facilities, £650,000, and that's in addition to that £500,000 that I just referenced. What might be helpful to yourself and to me as well is if we go away and have a bit of a deeper dive and look at what halls we're going to look at in respect to that money, because I suspect you're going to see a fair proportion of that allocated to halls within the rural area. There is still an unallocated amount of money, right? So if I go to the last item that's there on, or the second last item that's there on page 215, it says funds still to be allocated. It talks about the swimming pool floors, it talks about the upgrading of 3G pitches. And in terms of other items for consideration, if there are things that remain outstanding in terms of halls, that's an issue that could be picked up under that heading as well. So there's still scope within this to look at some of the things that you're talking about. But if we can start off by looking at that controlled access, which I know is a concern to you, and we can try and get an idea as to which halls in the rural area would be addressed. Just remembering there are these other pieces of work that are being done on our relationship with SLLC. We're looking at the financial relationship, we're looking at the commissioning relationship, which the councils ask of SLLC, and how do we measure what they're doing for us, but also property, and that's a piece of work that Stephen's leading on. So as part of that, we need to have a really good look at coming up with a medium to long-term approach to looking after our property, identifying what properties we're going to concentrate moving forward and investing in them properly. So this is a start, right, of something I expect to see materialise over the next few years. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank the Chief Executive for his diplomatic response. Can I come to Councillor Razak?
Thank you. Firstly, can I declare an interest that I'm part of the South Lanarkshire Leisure Board, one of the two remaining ones that are left on the South Lanarkshire Leisure Board, since everybody else seems to have jumped ship when things are getting hard. The first thing I would say is welcome the work that's been done in Blantyre Leisure Centre in my area, because it's long overdue and it's been an ongoing issue which has been affecting the members that are taking the monthly memberships out. And also I'm really pleased to see that gym equipment's getting replaced as well, because it's been made quite public in our area about the poor standard of it. I would also I'd like to thank the board, the group, sorry, about the transition fund. The fact that, you know, something proactive has been done, but after years of stagnation, that it was actually excellent to see that money is being put back into the communities and fixing our halls and leisure centres and everything else. The library provision, which isn't the best scenario. The best scenario is keeping the libraries open. We can't afford that. But the good news for Blantyre anyway is that we've actually got extended hours of opening, so that there's people that give them a better chance of going into the library for longer as well. And in a way that will help them, especially in winter time, to stay warm longer as well. So overall, I'm pleased. I'm pleased that the fact that we've done some very positive work, and I'd like to thank Stephen Gibson for this and for the efforts the council are making on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Razak. And I suppose it would be the appropriate time to thank members of the board for their contribution to South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. Can I come now to Catherine McClyman?
Thanks, Joe. It was just to welcome, obviously, the Transformation Fund in the first place, and a couple of places within my area that I wanted to mention the extra money that we're going to be getting for Lanark Library, because a year ago today we talked about that very point, that we didn't think we had enough money in the budget for that, and it went back out to tender. So thanks for that extra money, and hopefully that will be starting very soon, Stephen, maybe spring next year. It isn't wind and watertight, and it is affecting the service. The other, obviously, is the Memorial Hall in Lanark. I welcome the IT in there. However, on the negative side, I feel that some things have been missed here, and in particular, Lanark Lifestyles. There's facilities in there that are dangerous. In my mind, I have raised this with South Lanarkshire Leisure. I really do think if this is the final document, there's things missing that are needing to be attended to, and I don't think the councillors get any input into what we think maybe could be on our list. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll come to Paul Manning there just to deal with that, but could I maybe make the point that the proposals that are set out in the Transformation Fund are as they appear in the appendices. There are other funds available for a range of other works that will go into the capital programme or the prioritised urgent investment fund. And I think one of the reasons it was important to put this fund in place is that those funds were doing too much heavy lifting in a context in which there was really chronic underinvestment because of the financial constraints placed on the council. Could I come to Paul Manning?
Listen, I think Councillor Fagan has just said what I was going to say, but said it better than I could ever say it. Right. So what this was intended to do was to lift the quality of the facilities that we had and try and meet customer expectation. Things that are, where there are things that are wrong with facilities that mean that parts of them can't be used, we've got a prioritised investment fund that we can go to. So I can pick that up with you after this in terms of looking at that as a specific facility. If there's something wrong, we can look at how we can allocate money in order to get that sorted. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this paper? So, Councillor Logan, sorry.
We can all go to Paul. I was looking at that and I assumed, that it had been well looked at and looked after, and people had checked everything that was on it. And the bit I agree with Alec Allison is I wouldn't like to see just officers saying, like, this is the next bit. So you know, every single person sitting here and every single councillor, I assume, will have something that's, you know, no, they're not agreeing with or want something else. We could say, well, there's nothing at all in my ward, but I'm accepting that it's there and that it'll be worked on and it'll maybe come through. So it's a very difficult thing, and we can only thank the people that sat and did it. But so if we've all got a complaint about something, have we to come to you, Paul?
Paul?
Okay. Up to this point, I haven't been aware that you needed clarity to come to me with your complaints, right? But you feel free to do that. The point I'm making is, if there are facilities that are unusable, right, and there were references made there, right, to you know, issues about danger in their use, there are funds of money to deal with that. We should be aware of them, but if there are things that you're aware of that you think I'm not, feel free. The other point that was in there, which is just picking up on the last point that Councillor Allison raised, which was coming back to that point about, I think the reference was getting made to the fact that for each project, amend project scope is required when final costs are known. So again, this is about issues at the margin, right? So if there are things, we're laying out a broad scope there. If there needs to be a change to that, we would look for delegated power to move on and accommodate that. If there are things which are fundamental changes to the project, rest assured they'll be brought back to you. So the way we do with the capital programme, usually we would come back and communicate to you and get permission to change uses for money. So it's not looking for carte blanche to simply go and do what we want. It's just about changes at the margin in these projects.
Yeah, sorry, Paul, but that's not what the recommendation says. It does not quantify that it's just at the margins. So I would think that we need an amendment to say that the projects need, at the very least, local member agreement. I would propose that we add those words in.
I'll second that.
Okay, I don't think that's consistent with our normal approach to delegation, but Paul, do you want to add anything?
Okay, I'm happy to take advice from the Head of Legal Services, right? But I'm offering clarification in terms of what we mean there, right? And that, I'd imagine, can be accommodated within the minute. Exactly. Now, what we're talking about is adaptation to the project in comparison to what's contained in there within the papers, such that we can progress the jobs, but not deviating, right, from the project as it's laid out in the main, right? It's about adaptation at the margin.
Correct. It's not what it says.
Thank you. Morning. So, I mean, if you wanted something in there, Councillor Allison, you know, consistent with what the Chief Executive was saying, I wonder you could perhaps include, you know, amendments for project scope which are in the context of immaterial or a technical nature to enable officers to still proceed with the project as envisaged, and maybe that might meet your concerns.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
Right. Well, can we record that in the minute, and then it prevents the need for an amendment? Yeah. Okay. And that's also consistent with our standard approach to delegation on these matters. Right. Okay. With that recorded in the minute, can I bring us back to the recommendations, therefore? Can I ask that we agree the report? Agreed. We are agreed. I am very conscious of time, so can I advise you now that my intention will be to take the items for noting en bloc at the appropriate point in the meeting, if that is acceptable to the committee. However, to keep to the agenda, can I come now to item 11, which is on the Public Bodies Climate Change Duties Annual Report, and can I ask David Booth to speak to this item? David.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be quick with this report. The report presents the Council's Public Bodies Climate Change Compliance Report for 23-24. Section 2 of the report outlines the statutory framework for climate action and reporting, including a requirement to prepare an annual report on compliance and submit these reports to the Scottish Government by the 30th of November each year. Due to the committee timetable this year, it was not possible to present the full report to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee prior to the submission deadline. Instead, it was agreed at that committee on the 9th of October that the report would be submitted for approval to this Executive Committee today, and then submitted and then presented to the Climate Change Committee for noting on its next meeting of the 18th of December. A copy of the report can be found in Appendix 1, and the report provides data on corporate greenhouse gas emissions arising from organisational activities. It details the Council's carbon footprint, which is currently measured from 5 sources, and they are shown in 4.3 of the report. From 2024 to 25 onwards, waste and water from the Council buildings and home working emissions will be included in the Council's carbon footprint. Moving back then to Section 2 of the report, the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations. That the report is approved for submission to the Scottish Government, and that the report is presented for noting at the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee on the 18th of December for noting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions on that report? Could you please indicate now? I don't see... Oh, sorry. Councillor Robb.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the report, team. Just highlighting page 233, where the leadership assessment tool identifies that we're at foundation level for targets and delivery, and an improvement action that each service should now set out targets. I would certainly agree with that. It's in our terms of reference as the Climate Committee to monitor targets, but we don't yet have a plan to net zero. But with national targets coming up fast in 2030 on fleet and 2030 on buildings, I'd like to urge all resources to contribute to the forthcoming net zero plan. And I know there's a first report due to Climate Committee in March on that. Indeed, having discussed this with the Chair, we'd be interested in the committee hearing directly from service heads about what their service will do in 2025, 26 and beyond to contribute to emissions reductions. So it was just to ask for your support for that.
Okay, I think I'm getting nods of agreement. I think we can agree to that. Okay, can I move now? Can we agree the recommendations in the report? We're agreed. Can I come now to item 12, which are recommendations referred by resource committees? Ian Strachan will speak to this item.
Thank you, Chair. In the normal way, the purpose of the report is to request approval to 2 recommendations referred to this committee. As normal, there's an extract of the minute, a link to the relevant Resource Committee report in the paper. Firstly, the Education Resources Committee, 29th October. It decided that the CLD's strategic 3-year plan, 24 to 27, be endorsed and referred to the Executive Committee. The actions and measures set out to secure improvement in quality of life for the people of Lanarkshire be noted. Revised governance arrangements for annual planning and reporting be noted, and continued commitment to communities by South Lanarkshire and its partners through the work of the Community Learning and Development Partnership be noted. Secondly, we have the Finance and Resources Corporate Resources Committee of 30th of October. It decided that the Treasury Management Activity Report for 23-24 and the 23-24 Treasury Management and Prudential Code indicators be noted and referred to Executive Committee for noting, and that the 23-24 Annual Investment Report be endorsed and referred to Executive Committee for endorsement prior to submission to the Council for formal approval in line with the relevant regulations. So the recommendations for committee today are that the Community Learning and Development 3-year Strategic Plan 24 to 27 be approved, the Treasury Management Activity Report for 23-24 and the 23-24 Treasury Management and Prudential Code indicators be noted, and that the 23-24 Annual Investment Report be endorsed and referred to Council for formal approval.
Wunderbar. Can I ask, are there any questions on that item? I don't see any questions. Can we agree the report? Agreed. We are agreed. Can I come now to item 13, which is on fuel poverty, targets definition and strategy. Scotland Act, a response to the consultation. Craig Ferguson is here to speak to that item. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides the Executive Committee with a post-response to the Scottish Government consultation, seeking responses to support the publication of the first 3-year periodic report on reducing fuel poverty rates. Section 3 sets out the background here, and the Fuel Poverty Scotland Act 2019 sets ambitious stretching targets. a significant reduction of fuel poverty rates by 2040, and also establishes reporting requirements for the publication of the report by the Scottish Government. That also lists statutory consultee groups, as well as also listed organisations. So the first report is to be laid before the Scottish Parliament by the end of 24-25 financial year, and that'll cover a consecutive 3-year period from December 2021. The report itself will be a Scottish Government evidence-based report of progress on the steps taken in the reporting period towards meeting reducing poverty targets, including to address the 4 drivers of fuel poverty. At 3.5, we outline the activity that takes place across the resources to support our work in this area. It spans housing technical resources, finance and corporate resources, and also social work resources. At 3.6, the report outlines latest figures in relation to fuel poverty within South Lanarkshire and how that compares to the Scottish average. Noting the first bullet point, 22% of households in South Lanarkshire are living in fuel poverty. That's 2% below the Scottish average. 70% of families with children are living in fuel poverty, and 19% of pensioners' older households are living in fuel poverty, which is 8% below the Scottish average. Section 4 of the report covers the views, and we explain at 4.1 just to outline approach the Scottish Government has taken here, and details the questions from Appendix 2 that councils have been asked to respond to. Responses were due by the 8th of November, however, did get an extension from Scottish Government until today to the draft responses presented to this meeting of the Executive Committee. Individual responses will be considered for the final periodic report, and it's proposed that agreements provided by the Executive for purposes for this to be published as part of the Scottish Government process. 4.4 of the report provides some highlights from the proposed response, highlighting that the Council recognises the barriers and challenges for people heating their homes, including low incomes, poor financial resilience, and also poor energy efficiency within homes. Also noting in addition that the Council's significant rural population presents further challenges to increased energy costs in these areas. We also set in the proposed response actions taken by the Council to improve energy efficiency within domestic properties, including the investment of £78 million since 2021 in the housing stock. In terms of the actions taken by the Council to increase household incomes, that very much centres on the support provided by the Council's Money Matters Advice Service, generating £24.2 million in financial gains for residents in South Lanarkshire and supporting over 12,500 unique households, and also making another 6,500 referrals for emergency energy vouchers. The service also has a dedicated energy advisor, and that allows individual support provided tailored to individual client needs. It's important to highlight that it's not believed any one council can influence the global markets for fuel prices. We also highlight there's over 31,500 households in South Lanarkshire currently living in fuel poverty. We also highlight the expense of some of the measures around external wall insulation, heat pumps and heat networks has been a potential barrier to further improvements in the drive towards net zero, and also the accompanying improvements in energy efficiency these measures can deliver on. And just in the last bullet point in section 4, we very much highlight the challenges around measuring progress in this area. And we note there for Scottish Government's benefit, the data only available at council level every few years. The next data available is expected to be published in 2025, which is several years from the last survey being published. If I refer committee back to the recommendations in section 2 and ask that response in appendix 2 is approved for submission to Scottish Government following committee today. And also, secondly, agreements provided for the response to be published as part of the Scottish Government process. And I have to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the report, and also thankful for the extension to the deadline to allow our response to be considered. Are there any questions on the report? Can I come to Alec Allison? Alec?
Craig, first of all, was this report drawn up before or after the changes to the winter fuel allowance were made by the UK Government, and will that materially affect it if it hasn't been? And secondly, air-source heat pump systems are seen to be significantly more expensive than many other forms of heating. How has that contributed to fuel poverty?
Thank you for the questions. I'll respond on your first question, Councillor Allison, and I'll probably revert to Stephen Gibson in relation to the second one. In relation to this report has progressed over the past 4 or 5 weeks, so that kind of works in parallel with the changes we've seen at national level in relation to eligibility for the fuel poverty payment, the winter fuel payment. As members will know, we have launched a take-up campaign across South Lanarkshire, using both digital means and also posters and leaflets to make sure that we're encouraging as many people as possible who may be eligible for pension credit to make that application, to make sure we minimise as much as we can those households that may lose out through the changes brought in by national government. I'll pass over to Steve in relation to your second point.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Councillor Allison. Yeah, you're right to highlight that as a local authority, along with other local authorities, we're moving towards degassing. And the technology we're using is either ground source or air source heat pumps. And we're moving that to over a transition period to remove gas and domestic gas and people with off-site facilities in rural communities. The fluctuations in electricity costs are having an impact on the cost of air source heat pumps, and people are finding it more expensive using air source heat pumps just now, and that's down to the cost of electricity rather than the technology itself.
Yeah, I fully appreciate that, Stephen, that it's the cost of electricity that's causing the problem, but are we evaluating that problem at all? If we're putting this type of heating into social housing, surely we're making fuel poverty a greater problem.
The figures quoted, we talk about 31,500 people in South Lanarkshire being in fuel poverty. This is information we get from the Energy Savings Trust. It's not information that we gather, and that's something that we could be feeding into government. We have asked them to give us more defined measures of fuel poverty. At the moment, it's based on estimates of what they think an APC should be in areas where they're modelling it. Sometimes they know it, very often they don't, and it's one of the things that we can be looking at and we have fed into government to pick up.
Okay, can I come to Councillor Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Just a small point on page 261. It refers to the work of Money Matters in association with Home Energy Scotland. Would I be right in saying, would I not, that the Citizens Advice Bureau also play quite a considerable part in this? I know that from my contacts locally that CAB have had a very considerable increase in references to them over the recent period. I just wondered if we had figures that could be included from the CAB's work in that bit as well, because in a way it's a bit lopsided to have only Money Matters without the CAB bit. Thanks very much.
Craig?
Thanks for your point there. I'm happy to recognise the role that the CABs play. We do actually acknowledge within the submission itself what we've done with the WISE group 18 months ago, and we actually worked in partnership with the CABs, whereby the CABs made referrals into the council based upon the client engagement they were having. But certainly more broadly, happy to include a line around that, Councillor.
Okie dokie. I don't see any other questions. Can I draw us back to the recommendations in the report, and can I ask, do we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
We are agreed. At this point, I have to say the meeting's gone on for some time. There is one more item to take in our items for decision. I'm then proposing to take the items for noting on block, provided there are no objections. And then we do have to take an exempt item in private. I think that's going to take us a bit of time. And so I would like to maybe stop just now for a 10-minute break before we get into the remainder of the business. Okay, thank you. Okie dokie, folks. Just let us know if we're ready to recommence the meeting. We are. Right. Thank you very much for your patience. It is a heavy agenda. Can I come now to item 14, which is a response to a consultation on proposals to allow proxy voting by councillors, and Ian Strachan is going to speak to this item. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of the report advised the committee of a consultation by the Scottish Government on a proposal to allow proxy voting by councillors and to seek approval to a proposed response to that consultation. The Government is consulting on a proposed amendment to the Local Government Scotland Act 1973 to enable a councillor in Scotland to arrange for their vote to be cast by proxy. Another amendment would also be made to require local authorities to agree and publish a scheme setting out how proxy voting would work in practice, were they to choose to introduce it. It would be for local authorities to determine how a scheme could work in practice locally, and joint guidance would be produced by COSLA and the Government to assist the drafting of that operational scheme. The Government sets out instances where proxy voting could be appropriate, referred to in 4.3. The Government has, however, advised that at this time there's no suitable legislative opportunity to introduce this amendment should the consultation support its introduction. Broadly speaking, officers can see benefit in permitting local authorities the ability to introduce some form of proxy voting in such form as that individual authority considers appropriate. There are, however, a few comments that it is suggested are worth noting in the response. These are listed at 4.5 briefly. Though most authorities have arrangements in place for substitution, so in practical terms, it's most likely only to be relevant for meetings of the full council or where a member cannot arrange the substitute. Quasi-judicial matters cannot be predetermined, and from that perspective, it would seem appropriate that proxy votes are not permitted for quasi-judicial matters. In addition, if an elected member is unable to participate in the meeting, then they will not have heard the full discussion and debate, and as such might not be able to fully take all relevant considerations into account. That could include the public sector equality duty and the Fair of Scotland duty. As such, it's also recommended that consideration is given to proxy votes not being permitted for matters where councillors need to be able to participate in the meeting. There's some other more perhaps operational matters, if you like, that it shouldn't count towards a quorum. Members shouldn't be able to exercise a proxy vote where they would otherwise be unable to participate or vote in that meeting. And also, local authorities will need to be able to factor in how local arrangements for electronic meeting systems and votings would work in connection with proxy voting. Taking back to the recommendations, that the contents of this report be noted, and that the submission of the response by the Council to the consultation, as included in Appendix 1, be approved. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Are there any questions on that report? I have one from Lindsay. Lindsay Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. It's more of a comment than a question. It's just to welcome this step forward to introduce proxy voting and for the Scottish Government to consult on it for councillors. It's been a bit of an issue in the past around maternity and paternity and parental leave in the council, where well, I'm the only one that's taken maternity leave in the council, so but I think that I've had to come in a few times when for budgets, etc., when I've been on maternity leave, and in terms of that's all right now we've got online voting and stuff like that, then in terms of equalities, in terms of encouraging more younger and diverse councillors into the council, then this will be a step forward as well. So I highly welcome the consultation from the government, and hopefully it will go through, and hopefully the council will then adopt that going forward. Thank you.
Okie dokie. Thank you for that contribution. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions, so can I bring us back to the recommendations in the report? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
We are agreed. Thank you very much. As indicated twice now, if I come to items for noting, items 15 through to 18 are simply for noting. Is the committee in agreement with simply noting those items on block?
Agreed.
We are agreed. Thank you very much. That brings us then to item 19, which is urgent business. There are no items of urgent business. That takes us to item 20, which is the exclusion of the press and public. So, for the purposes of this item, I can confirm that the public section of this meeting has now concluded. Just a second.